You're fine. Sounds not important. Well, we all have moments like that, don't we? Hopefully it's not a wedding. And hopefully you're not the one responsible. But we do have moments where we kind of just utterly fail. And a lot of times it's embarrassing, a lot of times it's not funny in the moment. But hopefully that, like that couple, they looked back and laughed about it, maybe. Maybe had some problems with the groomsmen. But we do have this tendency to fail kind of in the biggest moments of our lives. But thankfully we're not alone in this. I was trying to think of some times when people failed on the biggest stages of the world, and I'm a big sports guy, so really the only things I could think of were like great failure moments in sports. A couple years ago, Broncos fans know the pain of having one of the greatest offenses in NFL history, and then getting utterly destroyed in the Super Bowl by the Seahawks, 43-8. It's a failure. Another time, 2007 Patriots went undefeated the entire season and blew it in the Super Bowl. Man, you just can't come back from those. You just can't come back. Just this past year in basketball, the Warriors were up 3-1 in the finals and lost it. They let the Cavaliers come back and beat them. And finally, one of my favorites. I never actually watched American Idol, but I always saw the clips of people who got on TV and thought they could sing, but they would try, and it was terrible. They couldn't sing. It was awful, and so they failed. But we can think of lists like this that go on and on and on. Just times that we fail. But I want to get a little bit more personal here. Sometimes the failures we make aren't always as funny as those. In fact, they're kind of hard to swallow sometimes. Whether it's failing to act or maybe it's failing not to act. Maybe you feel like you've failed your parents, or you failed your children, or maybe you failed as an employee. Maybe you failed your friends. They're all failures. These are the types of failures that crush us. They're the failures that lead to regrets. They make us feel worthless, and a lot of times we feel guilty at the end. Because in some of the biggest opportunities of life, we simply fail. But I've got good news for all the failures in this room. God still loves you, and I promise He can still work through your failures. Which leads us to our text today, which is in Mark 9. We're going to be starting in chapter 9, verse 14. As you turn there, we're at a story where Jesus and 3 of His disciples are coming down off the mountain. 3 disciples have just witnessed Jesus' transfiguration. And they're coming back down this mountain, and they run into the other 9 disciples. And the other 9 disciples are in an argument. They actually catch the disciples in one of their most awkward moments. A father has brought a boy to the disciples. He actually brought it to Jesus to cast out a demon, but Jesus wasn't there. He was up on the mountain. And so the disciples try to cast out this demon, and they can't. It's really embarrassing. They've been able to do this before, especially when Jesus wasn't around. But this particular time, they just can't. So they're embarrassed. They've actually kind of made Jesus look bad. Because everybody's expecting his disciples to be able to do what he can do, right? And so in a sense, they've failed Jesus. They've failed God. That's not a fun situation to be in. And so Jesus is coming down this mountain, and as we're going to see in the story, Jesus is actually kind of not in a very good mood. You can kind of pick up that he's frustrated, annoyed, which is surprising because he's just come back from the Transfiguration. But on the other hand, that might be an explanation for it. You know, when we're up on a spiritual high of a mountain, and then we come back and are hit with the real world, we tend to get grumpy. I've experienced it. Gone for a whole week of CIY, and man, everything's so great and blissful and everything, and then you come back and life slaps you in the face, and you're just not happy. Jesus especially is coming off of a spiritual high. I mean, he's been given a taste of his glory and godly form that he cast off when he came to earth. And then he's right back into the real world again. It's probably not an easy transition for him, which explains why he might be in this bad mood. But because the disciples are in this position, I feel like we can really relate to their failure here. Their feeling of failure, literally failing God. So, starting in verse 14, when they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them, and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. No surprise. Everybody knows Jesus by this point, and he's finally here. Finally, the real show is about to start. The backups, the disciples have failed at this point. And so they all run to greet Jesus, and Jesus walks down and says, what are you guys arguing about? You can already kind of get this hint of frustration. What are you arguing with them about? He said. And here, finally, a man in the crowd, he steps forward. In Matthew's account of this story, he says the man came up and kneeled before him. He kneeled before him because he knew Jesus was the real important one here. Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. They failed. You unbelieving generation, Jesus replied. How long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. Failure tends to find us. We really don't have to go looking that hard. The Christian life is difficult, we know this. And as hard as we might try, it never seems to fail. We end up stumbling somewhere along the way. We end up being like the disciples here. A picture we weren't expecting to see, or maybe we lose our cool and we get angry. Maybe we just get greedy. We feel great about our faith, but then we hit a snag and we're back to square one just like the disciples were. See, this really wasn't anything new. Jesus had sent the disciples off before. He said, hey, go cast out demons, and they did. They were great at it. But here in this moment, their faith took a step back, and they failed to cast out a demon. They could not do it. This past Olympics, there was a Haitian hurdler, Jeffrey Jolmes. As he was running towards the first hurdle, he misjudged his first jump, and he hit it. He didn't even make the first hurdle. He tripped over it, and the other racers kept on going, and they all finished while Jeffrey was left behind. I know we can often feel like that. No matter how much we train and we feel good about it, man, we can be in the Olympics and we can be ready. We know we got this. And then we trip on the first hurdle. And we're embarrassed. I just feel like a failure. But Jeffrey, he didn't give up. He calmly got back up to his feet and he proceeded to jump over the rest of the hurdles and he finished the race. That's what we have to do. Hebrews 12:1 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So we must persevere. Even when our faith takes a step back, even when we stumble, we must persevere and we must keep our eyes on Jesus. which is what the disciples failed to do here. Starting in verse 20, we're told why we can persevere. And it's because failure is overcome by faith. So they brought him, the boy. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" For some reason, when I hear Jesus say this, I picture rolling up his sleeves like a medical doctor. "All right, clear the operating room. Now tell me, how long has he been like this?" "Well, from childhood," the father answered. You can see that the father's frustration is starting to build up here. First the disciples failed, now the boy's brought to Jesus, and now he's on the ground convulsing. Imagine this. Your son's on the ground convulsing, and you're expecting Jesus to heal him. You just want Jesus to heal him, and Jesus stops and says, "How long has he been like this?" "What's it matter, Jesus? Just heal him." But no, Jesus wants to know, how long has he been like this? "From childhood," he answered. "It's often thrown him into fire or water to kill him, but if you can do anything, take pity on us. Help us, Jesus." "If you can," said Jesus, "if you can." Everything's possible for one who believes. I do believe. Help me overcome my belief. Just heal him. You want to know what this father was feeling at this moment? The word there for exclaimed, immediately the father exclaimed, that's the same word used 2 verses later when it said the spirit shrieked as it came out when Jesus told it to leave. The agony the demon felt when Jesus commanded to leave was the same agony this father was feeling watching his son roll around on the ground. He just wanted to stop. He just wanted to stop. He wanted Jesus to heal him. You know, while I was studying for this, it clicked. You know, Jesus said all it takes is the faith of a mustard seed to move mountains. And, you know, that's really little. That's not a lot at all. But then I realized that this is exactly what Jesus is talking about. See, his father, he literally only had a mustard seed of faith. When you're to the point where you're saying, I do believe, help my unbelief, you don't have much left. His father didn't. He was down and ready to do anything, and he was pretty much out of faith. First, the disciples failed, and now here Jesus just asked him what seemed like meaningless questions. All he had left was a mustard seed of faith. And when our faith's in the pits, sometimes all we can muster is a mustard seed of faith. You know what? That's all we need. That's all God needs, because God's greatest works come when he uses little to nothing. This brings us to our third point. Failure showcases Christ's power. Starting in verse 25. When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, Oh, Jim, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up to his feet, and he stood up. Failure showcases Christ's power. And that's exactly what happens here. The failure of pretty much everyone in this story, by their lack of faith, is overcome by the mustard seed of faith that this father had. Because it's all he had left. And once again, Jesus does what he always does. He takes that mustard seed of faith, and he does what he does best. He heals the boy. But Jesus doesn't just cast out the demon. He pretty much brings the boy back to life. The boy that should have been dead. We're told that this demon had been doing this to this boy since he was a child. He'd been trying to throw him into fire. He'd been trying to throw him into water. The demon had literally been trying to kill him. And now, as the people looked on, to a lot of them, this kid may have been dead for years. And a demon that's taken over him so many times, he's pretty much gone anyway. And now as the demon's cast out, it looks like that it finally got the last laugh. It had gotten its way. It had finally succeeded. The boy was now dead. He's on the ground. He looks like a corpse. Everyone thinks he's dead. But he didn't. No, the demon did not get the last laugh. The demon did not succeed. Because the boy who should have been dead was stood up and brought back by Jesus. You know what I like about all this? Is that Jesus is still doing this today. So there's three different real characters in the story, four including Jesus. You have the disciples, you have the Father, and you have the boy. Now the boy is really not mentioned all that much, but he is kind of one of the focal characters. Maybe you're like this boy today. You're lying on the ground and you feel dead. Not only do you feel dead, but you look dead. Everyone around you who's known you, they look at you and you look dead. They say, yeah, he's breathing, but he's not alive. No. They've been dead for years. If that's you today, then man, just reach up. Reach up and take Jesus' hand. Let him pull you up and stand you back up and bring you back to life. Because that's what Jesus does best. That's what he does. But this isn't just for those of you who haven't experienced Jesus. Now, some of you have been known as Christianity thing for a long time. And even though you've been doing it for years, it kind of just seems like your faith's really taken a step back. You're like the disciples in this moment. It feels like that whatever you used to have is just gone. And it's been gone for a long time. Some of you remember the days when your faith was big and it was great. When you could move mountains with your faith. But those were a long time ago. Now these days it hardly seems like anything. You end up being like the Father and you pray every day, God, I believe. Help my unbelief, because all you have left is a mustard seed. That's it. At some point in time, your faith was fully bloomed. And it was like a beautiful flower, but then somewhere along the line, somebody came along and crushed it into the ground. They smeared it, and they kicked it, and you watched as it blew away in the wind. And now here you are, barely hanging by a thread. All you have left is a mustard seed. Faith. But I've got good news to you. I'm just keeping this short and sweet today. We've all seen what God can make out of nothing. I'll give you a hint. Look around. So if this is your day, if either you feel dead and you've never experienced Jesus, then you know what? Today's your chance to come forward and take his hand and let him lift you out of your death and your sin. And let him save you. Let him bring you back to life. Or, if you've been doing this for years and you're just hanging by a thread, you're praying, God, help my unbelief. Bring me back, Jesus. Just help me, like the disciples do. Then you also just raise your hand and take Jesus' hand and let him pull you forward. And when he does, give him your mustard seed of faith. Give him all that you have left, even if it's hardly anything at all. Because we know that a mustard seed of faith can overcome a mountain full of failures. And so, reach out. Give him your mustard seed of faith. And watch what he can do with your mustard seed faith.